Here are the key issues and impacts for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in regards to residential aged care.
Firstly, there is not enough aged care facilities close to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's home and community. A study done showed that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a strong will to grow old and die on country. This correlates with the social determinants of health in the area of residential environment. By ensuring communities have access to basic goods and services, it is promoting physical and psychological well-being. Also, there is a low amount of Indigenous-run residential aged care facilities. A study that asked Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people what type of care they would prefer out of Indigenous or non-Indigenous run, 42.7% chose Indigenous. But unfortunately, just within Brisbane, there is only one Indigenous-run residential aged care facility, which is Jimbalunga. This correlates with the social determinants of health in the area of social capital, as there are clear links between people having close bonds with each other and an increase in life expectancy. Additionally, there is not enough culturally appropriate care within existing residential aged care services. This correlates with the social determinants of health in the area of social exclusion, as by having a lack of cultural resources available is creating social disadvantage and can lead to psychological stress and therefore harm someone's health. These points tell us that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are in fact underrepresented within Australia's aged care services, as well as is the difficulty in accessing aged care services when living rural or remote. This correlates with the social determinants of health in the area of socioeconomic position, as people from poorer economic or social circumstances are at a greater risk of poorer health. But most importantly, we would like to address the strengths and resiliences that is demonstrated in aged care, which includes leadership qualities that target older Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. One of these skills is advocating. To name a few areas that the Indigenous community has advocated for is the improvement of access to aged care assessment services, improved cultural safety, and the development of the Close the Gap campaign.
There are some important pieces of policy and legislation which shape the provision of residential aged care to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia. The Aged Care Act 1997 is not evidently designed in collaboration with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, yet it dictates who can become an accredited aged care provider and how they are regulated and funded. Commonwealth funding is allocated on the level of medical and personal care need assessed for each individual resident. One observation is that this funding model fails to reflect the centrality of culture to the health and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. On a positive note, under the Act, all service providers are required to regard the particular physical, physiological, social, spiritual, environmental, and other health-related care needs of individual recipients, which provides some optimism for culturally safe and responsive care. The National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program funds organisations to provide culturally appropriate aged care to older Indigenous people close to home and community. It has certainly increased access to these important services. However, most of the funding is directed towards rural and remote services providing in-home care. In the area of residential aged care for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and especially for the urban Indigenous population, it has made little contribution. The Aged Care Diversity Framework provides some hope for the future of residential aged care provision for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It was developed in partnership with representatives from the community-controlled Indigenous health sector and speaks of human rights, empowerment and choice. It is aimed at getting service providers to better attend to diversity within the ageing population and recognises the range and magnitude of social and cultural barriers faced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in accessing and optimising their experience of aged care. Published in December 2017, we are yet to see whether this policy framework can help shape the future of aged care to better meet the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Lastly, if the Close the Gap strategy actually ends up working and Indigenous people do begin to live longer, the requirement for good quality, culturally responsive residential aged care will increase. 10 years on, the Close the Gap strategy has not significantly reduced the disparities in life expectancy and health and wellbeing outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience age-related illness, disability and death at a much earlier age than non-Indigenous people, they can access aged care services from 50 years onwards compared to 65 years for non-Indigenous people.
Here are the best practice approaches to service delivery for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in relation to residential aged care.
The two main components are the accreditation standards for general residential aged care and a quality framework for the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program. An example of best practice approach is seen in Jumbalanga Nursing Centre, a community-run care that is developed with Indigenous people. Jumbalanga provides aged care services based on a culturally appropriate framework. It involves the adaptation of mainstream services to a cultural worldview. This structure crystallizes the determination of Indigenous peoples to assert independence and community control, indicating elements of empowerment in service delivery. The current 4 accreditation standards for mainstream aged care services are Management Systems, Staffing and Organizational Development, Health and Personal Care, Care Recipients' Lifestyle, and Physical Environment and Safe Systems. The Quality Framework for the Flexible Aged Care Program aims to provide culturally appropriate aged care to older Indigenous peoples close to their home and community. It includes 2 overarching principles: cultural safety, which recognizes the cultural identity and rights of the people, and continuous quality improvement of services and outcomes. These principles further shape 2 standards: firstly, care delivery and information; secondly, management and accountability. The first standard includes these components. Under assessment, residents' preferences and needs are assessed on entry, forming the basis of a cultural support plan. It maximizes independence, maintains friendship, and encourages participation in the community. Care planning refers to an individualized documented care plan, which consists of activities for residents like religious services, and this involves days of personal, cultural, and spiritual significance that are planned and celebrated in the home. Standard 2 includes these components. For human resource, 30% of the staff are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Given the team's life experience and emphasis on values that resonate with Indigenous belief systems, care is therefore delivered within a relationship of trust. It is crucial that an institution creates the environment to facilitate the opportunity for people to empower themselves. Residents' rooms have views to the sky no matter their location within the room, allowing for an open concept, which fosters a sense of connection with the world around them. A sense of community is key to a sense of self. The home has these facilities for residents, family, and community to celebrate special cultural events such as Night Out Day. It also has a music and well-being group for residents to acknowledge one another's life history through the shared experience of music. However, Jumbalanga has areas that have been unmet. Residents were previously unsatisfied with the safety of the home. Also, initial clinical assessments were not consistently completed, resulting in a potential delay in identifying residents' needs.
To actually attend to the health and well-being of older Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people well, services need to be developed and provided through consultation and collaboration with this community so that older people have options, so they can choose services that are structured around Indigenous ways of knowing, doing and being, and services that sustain and nurture cultural vitality. ATSIX is a great example of community-controlled healthcare provision and authentic, culturally safe and responsive care. We have heard from board members at Jumbalanga that they are in the process of expanding their services and building another residential aged care facility in Brisbane. This is great news and highlights the leadership that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander controlled organisations are taking in this area. Considering that 78% of Indigenous people in residential aged care are using mainstream services, our recommendations to ATSIX are as follows. If they are not receiving funding under the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program, follow this up to ensure the continued viability and expansion of Jumbalanga. Advocate for the expansion of the Flexible Aged Care Program to meet the community's need for culturally appropriate and community-led residential aged care for those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who can no longer live at home. Advocate for quality rather than simply compliance measures across all residential aged care facilities in regards to cultural safety. Perhaps ATSIX could be involved in enhancing culturally responsive practice in mainstream residential aged care services. Continue to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to work in the field of aged care, and continue to attend to the social determinants of health and well-being relevant to the trajectory of people into residential aged care.